Montana Territory, April 1876. The wind dragged a sheet of dust across the cracked earth as Cora Sutton stood beside the wagon axle, her face set toward the horizon like she could will a future into shape with the strength of her stare. Behind her, two small children, Daisy, age 6, and Daniel, barely 4, sat limp in the shade of the busted wagon, too tired to cry anymore, cheeks sunburned, lips cracked. They had not eaten since daylight, and the water had run dry by noon. The man who was supposed to be their father had ridden away the day before, taking the last horse and promising to bring back help. Cora had not believed him even when he said it. His eyes had already looked too far away. She did not cry. Not anymore. Not since her husband died crossing the Yellowstone last spring, and not since she made the mistake of trusting the wrong man to take her and the children west. A sharp whistle cut through the silence. Cora turned fast, hand going to the small pistol tucked in the folds of her skirt. A rider galloped up from the south, lean in the saddle, coat flapping behind him like wings. He reined in, dirt flying from the hooves of his bay gelding. His eyes, under the low brim of his hat, were the color of storm clouds, gray, sharp, and watching. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low, steady. Cora squared her shoulders. "We have been better." He swung down, tall, broad-shouldered, dust-covered boots, shirt rolled to his elbows. He looked like a man used to being alone but not unfriendly. "I am Luke Vance," he said. "I was trailing a herd when I saw the wagon, thought it looked wrong from a distance." Cora hesitated. "Cora Sutton, these are my children, Daisy and Daniel." Luke nodded toward the little ones but did not crowd her. "You got food, water?" "No," she kept her chin high. "And no horse." He glanced at the broken wheel, then at the sun. "Nearest town's Red Bluff, 20 miles south. I can take you." "I will not leave the wagon," she said, "and I will not leave my children." "I did not expect you to." He looked her full in the face then. "I can help. If you let me." Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. "Why would you?" Luke's jaw worked like he was chewing on something unspoken, then he said, "Because leaving you here would sit wrong in my gut." Cora studied him. His face was weathered but young, maybe 30. There was no threat in his stance, just something steady, solid. She nodded once. He moved fast after that. He gave Daniel his canteen, tore dried meat into small pieces for Daisy, then checked the wagon. "Axle is split." "You are not going anywhere with this." "I already figured that." "I can ride you all out one at a time, but it will take hours." He paused. "Or you can let me stay the night, build a fire, I have supplies." "At first light we ride." Cora weighed the risk, but all she saw behind her was open land and no better choices. "All right." He unpacked bedrolls and biscuits, beans in a tin. He boiled water, rolled up his sleeves, and made sure the children were warm. When Daniel began to cry from a nightmare, Luke lifted the boy gently and held him until he stilled. Cora watched the way he moved, quiet and careful. He never asked questions that made her flinch. He never looked at her with pity. By the firelight, her voice broke the silence. "I married young. My husband was a blacksmith. He died last year, drowned." She stared into the flames. "The man who brought us this far was not good to us. He left yesterday." Luke's hand stilled over the pot. "I am sorry." "I do not want your sorrow." He looked at her then, long and even. "Then I will not give it." They sat quiet for a while. The fire cracked. The wind shifted. Luke took out a small harmonica and played something slow and low, not for performance, just to fill the dark. Cora's throat tightened. "Where are you headed?" He leaned back on one elbow. "Nowhere in particular. I ride cattle, break horses, go where they send me." She turned toward the low hills where the stars began to prick the sky. "I want to get to Oregon, start fresh, build something small." Luke followed her gaze. After a moment, he said quietly, "Let me be where you are going." Cora looked at him, really looked. "You do not even know me. I know you stayed when another man ran. I know you have not cried once. I know those children come first in your every breath." His voice stayed low. "That is enough to start." She could have told him no, she had every reason to, but instead she said, "Tomorrow, let us see what kind of man you are tomorrow." He nodded slow. "Fair enough." The wind shifted again, softer this time. The children slept curled together. Luke added another log to the fire and handed her a blanket. Cora took it, but her eyes stayed on his face, and for the first time in too long, something in her chest loosened. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The sun rose thin and pale, casting long streaks of light across the open land. The fire had gone to ash, and the cold clung to the air in silence. Cora stirred first, easing herself upright from the hard ground, her back stiff from the night. Luke was already standing a little ways off, hands resting on his belt, eyes on the distance where the morning began to warm the ridgelines. She rose carefully, stepping over Daisy's sleeping form to where he stood. His hat was tipped back, and the wind tugged at the edge of his coat. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some," he said. "Enough." They didn't speak for a moment. The land around them felt too wide to fill with words. Then Luke turned toward the wagon where the wheel leaned wrong against the frame. "I'll take you all to Red Bluff, like I said," he said. "Once you're there, you can decide if Oregon's still where you're headed." "I've not changed my mind," she said. "I didn't think you had." He looked down a moment. "But you've got little ones. Might be worth seeing what works around before you go chasing the coast." "I'm not chasing anything," she said. "I'm trying to build." He nodded once. "Then I'll get you there." She watched him as he walked back to the camp, kneeling to wake the children with a gentleness she hadn't expected from a man who rode alone. He didn't speak much while they ate what was left of the beans, but when Daniel reached for the tin with sticky fingers, Luke didn't pull it away. Just wiped the boy's cheek with the corner of his shirt and passed him the last bite. Cora packed what she could into the burlap sack, wrapped it tight, and fastened it with twine. Luke tied it behind his saddle, checking the cinch twice. The bay stood calm beneath his hand, patient. "You'll ride behind me with Daniel," he said. "Daisy can ride in front, hold the horn." Cora hesitated, her hand on the child's shoulder. "You sure he'll carry all of us?" "He's carried more and worse," Luke said. "He's steady." They mounted slow, careful. The children didn't fuss much. The night had taken the fight out of them, and the horse's warmth was a comfort. Cora settled behind the saddle, her skirt bunched tight in her fist. Daniel pressed between them. They rode south, the broken wagon shrinking behind them until it vanished into the land. The wind picked up as the day wore on and the sun crept overhead, but Luke didn't speak unless he had to. He pointed once to a hawk circling high, and another time to a creek that ran low between the hills. By early afternoon, he slowed the horse and dismounted near a stand of cottonwoods. The creek bent there, shallow and clear. He lifted Daisy down first, then Daniel, then turned and offered Cora his hand, which she didn't take. "I'm not made of glass," she said. "I didn't say you were." They ate in the shade while the horse cropped grass nearby. Luke pulled bread from his saddlebag, handed it around without a word. Cora watched the way he sat, knees drawn up, elbows resting on them. He didn't look restless, just settled, like this sort of pause was part of his blood. After a while, she said, "Where were you raised?" "West of Wichita," he said. "Before the war. My folks had a few acres, some cattle, dirt was never good. Brothers? One died near Franklin. I came back to nothing but a burned-out house and a mother buried under a cottonwood." She didn't answer right away. She traced a knot in the bark beside her with her thumb. "I was born near Topeka," she said. "My father ran a dry goods store. I wasn't supposed to end up out here. None of us were." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and something faintly green. The children dozed under the branches. Cora leaned back against the tree and let her eyes close for a moment. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said softly. Luke didn't move. "You don't have to know, just keep going." When she opened her eyes, he was watching her without weight or demand, just a quiet steadiness that made her chest ache. "Why'd you say that yesterday?" she asked. "What? Let me be where you're going." He looked away then toward the fields. "Because I meant it. You don't even know what I've done, what I've had to do." "I don't need to know everything," he said. "You're still here, that's enough." She didn't answer. Instead, she stood and brushed her skirt, then walked toward the creek to wash her hands, the cold water biting her skin. Behind her, Luke gathered the children. When she turned back, he already had the horse saddled again, waiting. They rode the last stretch into Red Bluff as the sky turned the color of brass. The town was little more than a few buildings clustered near the road livery, post, a saloon, and a dry goods store with a warped sign above the door. Smoke curled from a chimney somewhere down the street. Luke handed the reins to a boy at the livery and helped the children down. Cora stood on the packed dirt street, her hands tight at her sides. "I'll find us a room," he said. "You stay here." She didn't argue. When he returned, he nodded toward the boarding house across the square. "They've got space. You'll have your own room. I'll take the bunk out back." "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat. "You need anything, I'll be nearby." She watched him walk away into the dusk, the children leaning against her legs. Her bones ached from the ride, and her shoulders felt too heavy for the frame they sat on. Still, for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was bracing for the ground to give way beneath her feet. She looked out past the rooftops where the hills caught the last of the sun. And though she didn't say it, she thought it. He might be where I'm going. The boarding house walls were thin, and the mattress dipped in the middle, but Cora slept heavier than she had in months. When morning came, dim and gray through the lace-curtained window, she woke to Daisy tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and whispering, "Mama, it's quiet here." Cora brushed the child's cheek. "It is." They dressed in the quiet morning light and made their way downstairs. The landlady, a woman with a mole near her jaw and a voice like wet gravel, offered them a plate of cornmeal mush and a scrape of butter. Cora thanked her, and the woman only nodded, too busy with her own thoughts to pry. After breakfast, Cora walked the children to the edge of the square where a whitewashed church stood, its steeple leaning ever so slightly westward. She paused there a while, then turned back toward the livery. Luke stood near the corral, sleeves rolled down this time, brushing the bay's coat with long, familiar strokes. The morning wind carried the smell of hay and horse sweat, and something like pine from the hills beyond town. Cora leaned her arms on the fence rail. "I didn't expect you'd still be here." Luke didn't stop brushing, just shifted the brush to his other hand. "Didn't figure I'd leave while you were still figuring your next step." She watched the dust rise around his boots. "I'm thinking of staying on for a little while." His eyes met hers. "Then I'll stay too." "I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to." She looked down at her hands, then out past the corral to the dry hills rolling north. "I need work, and a roof that isn't borrowed." Luke set the brush aside. "There's a widow up near the ridge keeps goats. She's been looking for someone to help with milking and cheese wrapping. I hauled salt blocks for her a month back. And how would you know she'd hire me?" She's hard of hearing. "You're patient. That's all she'd care about." Cora exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. "You're assuming a lot." Luke leaned against the fence beside her, arms crossed. "I'm watching close." She didn't answer that. Instead, she turned toward the children who were crouched near the edge of the hitching post, poking at beetles with careful fingers. "You ever worked land of your own?" she asked. "No," he said. "Always belonged to someone else. Does that sit right with you?" "Hasn't yet." She turned her face toward him, and for the first time since they met, her voice softened without defense. "I want something that holds. Not just a campfire and the next trail." Luke nodded slowly. "So do I." They didn't talk more after that. He walked her to the goat farm after lunch, Daniel riding on his shoulders, Daisy gripping Cora's hand. The path led through a dry creek bed and up a slope that caught more wind than the valley below. The widow's house was little more than a shingled shed with a lean-to, but it sat straight under the sky. The goats scattered when they arrived, and a dog barked once before settling. The widow, her face lined deep and her shawl pinned with bone buttons, listened to Cora's words with pursed lips, then nodded and pointed toward the shed. That was all it took. By supper, Cora had a place to work each day and a promise of milk and bread in exchange. The children could come with her, and the widow didn't seem to mind their chatter or their naps in the hay. Luke didn't linger after he saw them settled. He tipped his hat and said, "I'll come by after chores," then walked back down the hill, whistling something tuneless. That evening, after the children were asleep, Cora stood out behind the boarding house, arms crossed, the hem of her dress brushing against dry weeds. Luke stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You always this quiet when you're content?" she asked. Luke folded the rag slow. "I don't know if I'd call it content, but it's closer than I've come." She tilted her head. "You planning to keep sleeping in that bunkhouse forever? Not if there's something better." She stepped toward him, small and sure, her voice low like she didn't want the night to overhear. "Suppose I said I didn't want to do this alone anymore." Luke's hands stilled. "Suppose I said I've been hoping you'd say that." Cora reached for his wrist, her fingers closing around it. "You sure? I come with sharp edges." "So do I," he said. "We'll wear them smooth together." In the hush that followed, she leaned into him, and he didn't move except to rest his palm against her back. The wind passed through the yard, and the stars came out one by one, but neither of them noticed. They stood like that until the cold crept in, and even then, they didn't let go. The first snow came early. It wasn't much, just a thin lace of white across the rooftops and fence rails, but it settled in the hollows and stayed through the morning. Cora stepped outside with her shawl pulled tight, boots crunching over frost. Daisy and Daniel ran ahead, chasing their own breath into the cold, their laughter rising like birds startled from brush. Luke was already at the widow's goat shed, hauling firewood to stack near the door. He glanced up when Cora approached, his breath fogging the air. "She say anything about the chimney?" he asked, shifting the weight of the logs against his side. "She said it draws crooked, but it draws," Cora said. "I'll be careful." Luke nodded and set the last of the wood in place. "I can check it before dusk. Smoke's been backing up in the wind." Cora wiped her hands on her apron. "You don't have to fix everything." "I don't mind doing what needs doing." She looked at him a long moment. "You ever plan on staying in one place this long?" "No." "What changed?" He glanced toward the ridge behind the shed where the snow hadn't touched the north slope. "Didn't know I could want something still." She let that settle between them before speaking again. "Daisy's been asking if you'll come to supper again." Luke's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Only if there's more of that cornmeal pie. You're easy to please. Only if I'm fed and warm." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about building out the shed behind the boarding house. It's got space for a stove, could be a kitchen." "You planning to cook for half the town?" "No, just for us." Luke's jaw shifted like he was working over the shape of that word, us. "I could help frame it," he said. "If you want." "I do." They stood silent, the cold slipping around their ankles. Then Daniel called from the fence line, waving a stick like a sword, and the moment passed. That evening, Luke stayed through supper. The boarding house dining room was dim, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper, but Cora had managed to coax color from root vegetables and a piece of salted pork. Daniel fell asleep in his chair, and Daisy leaned against Luke's arm without asking. Later, after the table was cleared and the children laid in the bed upstairs, Cora stood in the doorway watching the street lamps gutter in the wind. Luke stepped up behind her, his voice low. "You still thinking about Oregon?" She didn't turn. "I was. For a long time. And now," she looked out at the dark, the shape of the hills just visible under the stars. "I think I was chasing distance, not a place. I think I wanted to get far enough from what hurt I wouldn't feel it anymore." Luke placed one hand on the doorframe beside her shoulder. "You think you have to leave to build something new?" "I thought so." He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I've spent most of my life moving, never thought it was fear, but maybe it was." Cora turned toward him. "You afraid now?" "No," he said. "Not with you." She stepped into him, her hands steady on his chest. "I don't want to be alone anymore." "You're not," he said. "Not now. Not again." They stood there until the lamp burned low and the wind stilled. When she reached for his hand, he took it without hesitation, and neither of them let go. By mid-December, the wind had teeth and the light came late. Snow fell again, deeper this time, clinging to fence posts and muffling the sound of boots on packed earth. Cora tucked the children into the warm room off the kitchen, quilts layered high, and checked the stove before stepping out into the yard. Luke stood near the shed, hammer in hand, the frame of the second wall rising behind him. Smoke curled from the chimney beside the boarding house. His coat was dusted white, breath steady in the cold. She crossed the yard slowly, wool shawl tight around her shoulders. "You'll lose that thumb if you keep working barehanded," she said. Luke set the hammer on the beam and flexed his fingers, red and raw. "It's easier to feel the nails this way. You'll feel a lot worse if you can't grip anything come morning." He looked over, half grin caught in the side of his face. "You always scold this sweet, only when I'm fond." He stepped down from the beam and rubbed his hands together briskly. "I've been thinking about the spring." She walked beside him toward the lean-to, the snow crunching beneath their boots. "What about it?" "There's land for lease near the South Bend, flat, good soil. Creek runs through it with enough water to keep a garden and a few animals." She stopped just short of the door. "You looking to farm now?" "I'm looking to stay," he said. "If you want to." Cora turned toward the dark line of trees beyond the yard. "It's not a small thing, owning land. Building from nothing, I know. I'd want the deed in both our names." Luke nodded once. "That's fair. And the children, they've already lost too much. I won't have them root somewhere only for it to shift under them again." "I'd build it to last," he said. She looked at him then, the frost catching in the edges of his hair, the quiet of his voice like something solid she could lean against. "I believe you." They stayed in the yard until the cold bit too deep. Inside, Luke helped carry wood to the stove while Cora stirred the pot of beans, her hands moving without thought. Daisy slept with one arm thrown across her brother's chest, their breath rising in rhythm. Later that week, Luke rode out to the land he'd mentioned. The creek was half frozen, but it ran clean, and the soil crumbled beneath his glove when he broke the crust. He returned just after dark, boots rimmed with ice, and found Cora still awake, mending a seam by lamplight. "I found a man who'll lease the parcel for 3 years with option to buy," he said. "He's fair, doesn't ask questions." Cora folded the shirt carefully, setting it aside. "We'll need a mule and seed." "I've got some money set aside, not much but enough to start." She met his eyes. "We'll manage." They married on the first day. The snows melted from the eaves. It was quiet. Just the children, the widow, and the old preacher from the next town over who spoke with a rasp and kept his hat on indoors. Daisy helped sew the hem of Cora's dress, and Daniel carried the rings in a carved wooden box Luke had made from scrap pine. They stood beneath the bare limbs of a cottonwood, hands joined. Luke's voice didn't tremble when he said her name, and Cora looked up at him like she was seeing the whole of her life ahead, and not a single part of it frightened her. That spring, they moved onto the land. Cora, Luke, Daisy, and Daniel. The first weeks were hard, and the nights colder than expected, but the soil held promise and the creek didn't run dry. They planted beans, corn, and potatoes. Daisy collected eggs from the hens each morning, and Daniel insisted on feeding the mule, even when it fussed. Cora taught them their letters in the evenings, and Luke built a second room onto the cabin without being asked. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Cora stepped out into the dark and found Luke sitting on the porch, sharpening a blade by lantern light. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "Do you ever miss it?" He didn't look up. "The trail," she nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "but not the way I miss you when you're not near." She leaned into his shoulder, the scent of wood smoke and earth clinging to his coat. "I never thought I'd feel safe again, not really." "You're safe with me," he said. "I know, but more than that, I'm at peace." He set the knife aside, turned toward her, and rested his forehead against hers. "We'll keep building, whatever comes," and they did. The seasons passed, the crops grew. The land held. Daisy turned 10 with her hands already sure on a butter churn. Daniel grew tall and ran faster than the mule he once fed. Cora filled the shelves with jars of peaches and beans, her hands always busy, her heart never once drifting from the man who had stood beside her in the snow and said he wanted to stay. Luke never left, not for a night, not for a season. Each morning he rose early, kissed her cheek, and stepped out into the light as steady as the ridge they built their home beneath. And when the hard days came, as they always did, they met them together with calloused hands, quiet strength, and a love that no longer needed words to be known.